Well, I can tell you that I've had to do a little housekeeping here with the Flashback Express. So, but you don't want to hear about that. We're in session 45, and I wanted to move right along in the Temple Act. We covered various things. We covered the messianic entry into Jerusalem, which I call the unleashing of the eschatological events by the verbose language on the untying of the donkey, which is a donkey that harkens back to Genesis 49, the oracle of Judah, messianic oracle in the Torah, recycled in the prophet Zechariah chapter 9, entry of a peaceful king, but who will rule from sea to sea. So I think Jesus dramatizes that historically, for sure, bringing the attention of the Romans, probably, not just the temple police. And he's acclaimed as king, I think, with a huge crowd, as in John, palm fronds, maybe. And then he observes the temple, and as we said, Mark is the only one that interrupts that visit to the temple to insert the fig tree part 1. It is not the kairos or season for figs or for temple activity. The kairos of the kingdom has arrived. Mark 1:15. I am recapitulating. So that he says, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. Part 1 of the fig tree. And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began, which is a Markan favorite expression, which I don't think adds very much. I studied that in my dissertation. There's a great article on just that use of this word, to begin, to cast out. Now that I think Burton Mack and others have remarked that it does harken back all the way to the first exorcism of the man with an unclean spirit in chapter 1. It doesn't use that word there, that verb there, to cast out, ekbalo. It doesn't use it. But it's clearly the first of a series of casting out, exorcisms, which grow in crescendo in Mark. The crescendo involves what the demon or demoniac does, how far he is, what he calls Jesus, how many of them there are. So that in Mark 1, you've got one demoniac, possessed man, unclean spirit. He calls Jesus the Holy One of God. Ernst Lohmeyer calls that a priestly appellative because of Psalm 106. Aaron is the Holy One of God, the high priest. I'm recapitulating. And then you've got, exorcisms that take place, many demons. If you go a couple of verses later in 134, he expelled many demons and he didn't let them speak because they knew him. And then you've got, in chapter 3, the unclean spirits, upon seeing him, threw themselves down at his feet and yelled out, "You are the Son of God." So the crescendo continues, but he would, energically, tell them not to tell anybody. And the highest point of the crescendo is chapter 5, Legion, the demonic conglomerate. And from afar, this guy or this possessed conglomerate runs, uh, prostrates himself before Jesus and cries out in a loud voice about, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of God Most High?" Which in Hebrew would be El Elyon, or in Aramaic too, basically. And so you have this crescendo in the exorcisms, and now you have the use of the same verb to describe what Jesus does. And what he does in Mark clearly, and I think Matthew copies him, Luke does not. Let me double check John. Uh, in John, also, he doesn't copy Mark. Mark is the only one that says he cast out sellers and buyers, which is a hendiadys. The Bible scholars call that a hendiadys, a totality indicated 1 through 2, literally. You use two things to indicate a whole, one totality. So I think Mark is really depicting the casting out of everyone in the temple. Incredibly difficult to do. Josephus, I think, has thousands of people during Passover in the temple. But the point is that the first thing Jesus does is to cast out everyone, buyers, sellers, and buyers in the temple. So one of the things that Werner Kelber, a scholar that I remember from using in my dissertation, he actually met him at an SBL conference. He notices the prepositions. Jesus goes into the temple. He casts out the buyers and sellers in the temple. And then he does not allow anyone to transport any vessel through the temple. So you've got into, in, and through. That's another sort of totality of the what Jesus's activity in the temple encompasses. And the tables of the dove sellers and the seats of the sellers, of the money changers and of the dove sellers, he catastrophizes. Now, that's a very interesting word, catastrophize. It's only used here and in any other gospel that copies this very same thing. And it's also used by Peter, if I recall correctly, 2 Peter 2:6. Actually, it's used in a couple of different places, not in the exact same form. In fact, it's only used here and in Matthew, and I think there's a variant in Acts 15:16. So let me look at Acts 15:16 1 second and see what that's all about, because I didn't quite remember that very, very well. It has to do with lifting up the ruined hut or sukkah of David at the very end of Amos. So this is in the Jerusalem Council, etc. And it's katastrophein would be this reference to this fallen hut of David, a sukkah, like in the Feast of Booths. What is the significance of this catastrophizing or overturning of these tables and seats? If you look up this Greek word in the Greek Old Testament, it's almost always used for Sodom and Gomorrah. So it's a real destructive verb, again, directed against a really sinful, to be destroyed entity, in this case, Sodom and Gomorrah. And I think there's other stuff that I wrote about Job sending barefoot the priests and other highly positioned people. I'm not going to get into that sort of detail now. I could perhaps look at it more closely later. But my point in this kind of presentation is to point out real literary elements that are present in this Greek description of what Jesus did. And I do conclude in my dissertation that the historicity of what he did something in the temple, in fact, is in direct inverse proportion to the size of what he did. In other words, if he did something that basically went unperceived, then okay, what did he do, and is it important? Remember that when Paul causes a ruckus in the temple in Acts 21, he gets arrested. So the temple had, I think they call it the flowers of the priesthood, and I kind of translate it as young bucks that were there ready to pounce on any unseemly activity in the temple. They've got a lot of strange scholars. I think his name is Strange, James Strange, talked about Jesus came into the temple with an army. All these people, I mean, the Bible scholars love to speculate really weird stuff. But definitely Jesus, I think, predicted the destruction of the temple in Mark 13:2. He didn't say he was going to do it, but he predicted the destruction of the temple in Mark 13:2. And we know that Luke transfers that to Stephen in Acts. We know Jeremiah predicted the destruction of the temple. We know there's a Jesus ben Hananiah, a little bit after Jesus, a little bit before the destruction of the temple, who walked around Jerusalem for a long time saying the temple is going to be destroyed. Voice from the east, voice from the west, etc. Josephus talks about him, and the whoever the authority was, and I don't recall who it was, if it was still Pilate, flogged him and said, this guy's just nuts. So that predicting the destruction of the temple was not a unique thing. Amos has things about, casting down the temple and hitting over people over the head with the columns of the temple, etc. So I think that Jesus was associated for sure with a sort of prediction, announcement that this temple, which was corrupt, would be destroyed. You already have Jeremiah, and you have other instances of Qumran, the Dead Sea Scroll monks, if you will. They separated themselves from the temple because of its corruption, disagreement with the kind of priesthood that had taken over, etc. And so Jesus was definitely associated with an anti-temple stance of some sort. Remember when we looked at passages regarding go show yourselves to the priest, the leper in chapter 1 of Mark, I followed Lloyd Gaston as a witness against them. Show the priest that I have been able to do to a leper, clean him, which God was the only one supposed to do that, said Elisha in 2 Kings, I think, or maybe at the end of 1 Kings, I think it's 2 Kings. And so you've got, Jesus really taking a stance against the high priest And I think it's Ernst Lohmeyer who also says that they were his real uh, enemies and were out to get him. And then unique to Mark, we may have more to say about that later, but unique to Mark is this line that I think has to be properly translated, as the English Standard Version does not do, and almost no Bible does, except the Vulgate and those who follow it, like the King James. He would not allow anyone to carry a vessel through the temple. Okay? So that this word in Greek, and look at that, even the dictionary here is saying that it means anything, but it really doesn't. It is a piece of equipment or a vessel. And if you look this up again in Greek, in the Old Testament in Greek, it is often used for temple utensils. So that if we were to use it as the Latin has it, that anyone would transfer a vas, V-A-S, a vessel. So we get a vas deferens, I guess. I think you have a reference here to a cultic object. And all these things together led me to use the image of a heart attack, an infarct. Jesus paralyzes the temple activities, throws everybody out. He catastrophizes the place, and specifically the tables for changing money that, remember, is this half shekel in Tyrian coinage with a level of purity of silver, which was the famous temple tax from Exodus 30, verse 13. And that's what the money changes were for. So this is a real attack on the temple. Now, exactly what Jesus did, it's not my main concern. My main concern is, what is Mark presenting us with? And he's presenting us with a paralyzation of temple activity as some sort of a prelude and portent of the destruction of the temple that Jesus is going to announce a couple of chapters later in 13:2. Not a stone upon a stone. And we went over that yesterday, and I'll repeat. The prophet Haggai, the great advocate of rebuilding the temple as a way of restoring prosperity after the exile, says, you will have laid a stone upon a stone, and immediately everything will change for you, the harvest, the rains, etc. And now Jesus is using the same language, a stone upon a stone, in the opposite sense, that will not be destroyed, he predicts. 40 years ahead, by the way, in 70 AD, he's presumably speaking around the year 30, and he's predicting something in 40 years later, just like Amos, probably around 760 BC, is predicting the destruction of the northern kingdom and its sanctuaries, etc., in 722 BC, which is approximately 40 years later. So we're going to stop there. I think next time I'll try to show you my page in my dissertation where I point to 7 different elements that have to do with a temple purification, really, in Maccabees, the 2 books, and how those 7 elements are present in an opposite way in Mark. And so I think what Mark is really depicting here is a portent of destruction rather than any kind of cleansing. So this temple cleansing thing. And we'll have to go over some other things. This Den of Thieves, I'll revisit that again. It's a bad translation. Cave of Violent Bandits is a good translation. But I'm going to stop there so as not to go past 20 at all. Thank you.